All right, so why don't we get started, and folks that can come in can just join in. And I believe the session is being recorded, so you're also welcome at a later point to share this with your colleagues as well. Welcome to our session on student financial stability and ways to strengthen what we'll talk about, the kinds of financial supports that can really enable students to not only start, but make progress and complete their educational goals at your institutions. My name is Priyadarshini Chaplot, she, her, hers, and I go by Priya, and I work at the National Center for Inquiry and Improvement as the Vice President of Strategy. And once upon a time, I used to be the institutional researcher at Mount San Antonio College, not too far away from you. So I'm really, really grateful to be here in this space with you. Dilsey, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Delcy Perez, and I have the wonderful opportunity of serving as the Vice President of Student Services at Cerritos College, and had the wonderful opportunity of also working at Miracosta College, and prior to that in the California State University system. So excited to be here with you today.
Thank you very much, Delcy. And what Delcy and I would like to do today is spend the next hour talking a little bit about this notion of student financial stability, what it means and how it impacts the ability of students to make progress and succeed in whichever educational goals they choose. We're also going to be talking about the difference between how we as institutions design supports for our students and what the impacts might be on the student experience and how it varies for different sets of students. And Delcy will be grateful enough to share with us the story of the incredible work that's happening at Cerritos College. And then we'll wrap up with just some strategies that your college might want to consider in reflecting on this work moving forward. And so for many reasons, including the fact that it is National Poetry Month, we'd like to begin with a grounding poem. And this is by the incredible Lucille Clifton, and it's called "Won't You Celebrate With Me?" Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. I want us to just reflect on this poem as we kind of go through the ways in which our own institutions facilitate, and also the ways in which our institutions unintentionally act as barriers to certain groups of students as they move through our institutions. And to think about the way that we can really facilitate the movement of our students further along these pathways. And so the first most important piece is, why are we talking about student financial stability? Over the years, as our focus has moved from student access and enrollment to student progress and success, we've had a greater and greater need to recognize the realities of our students' fullness, wholeness, and lives in terms of the beyond the walls of the college and the ways that those types of factors can affect the ability of students to really focus on their learning and their achievement. And so one goal is to really encourage student progress and success, but the larger reason we're trying to do this is for those larger goals of long-term economic mobility for our students, reducing intergenerational poverty for our students and their families, and really thinking about the ways that we can build a community that sees the kind of larger purpose of their education and the context of their education. And so I want to just begin by framing a little bit about what the current climate is around student financial stability. And one place to look is in a series of reports that have been done through something called United for ALICE. ALICE is an acronym that stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Yet Employed Households. So ALICE households are households which in which the members are working, but they still cannot afford the basics of a household budget. And if you look at the last bullet in California, and there's a resource that we share at the end of this slide deck that allows you to dig in by county for what the ALICE threshold is at in your own county and service area. But in California, 1 in 3 families are considered ALICE households, that they are working and yet they can still not address their basic needs. And if we drill in a little bit closer, we can look at something that came out just in the last month, the Hope Center, which is an incredible outfit that has done year after year of work around basic needs and college students. They released their most recent survey just at the end of March, and in here found that 3 out of 5 students, and they had surveyed both colleges and universities, so 3 out of 5 students experienced some kind of basic need security. And basic needs, when we keep talking about this, it's those kind of fundamental life needs. It would include food and housing, transportation, and especially in the pandemic, technology, access to healthcare, mental health services, all the real life things that affect the ability of students to show up and really lean into their education. And so in this survey, not only did they find that a majority of students were experiencing some kind of basic need, the other stat that really kind of was flooring was the one in the green box on the right that said that 52% of students, over half of the students that they surveyed, did not apply for supports because they did not know how. And for me, that's a story of optimism. That's a story of, we have some of these structures already in place. And a part of our work is not about doing new and doing more. It's really about like recognizing what is there and is being underused, is understated, or might be sending out messages to students that we don't intend and that we need to address. One last piece of the survey that I really want to mention is that they surveyed college students that were still enrolled. And they did not survey students who had left the institution, which to me means that they might be undercounting the severity of these issues when it comes to the full college community. Lastly, I want to share this research study that came out a few years ago that I think is still very relevant and very sobering. In this study, they were looking at college graduation rates by family income level and also by test scores. And the two pieces of data to focus on are the 2 brown circles that are in diagonally opposite areas. And so it says that 30% of the students that came from the highest income level families, but had below average test scores, completed college, compared to 26% of students that came from the lowest income bracket, but had above average test scores. And in other words, high performing low income students, 26%, completed college at a lower rate than low performing high income students. And one big takeaway, there are many takeaways, and I wish we could spend time just ruminating on this, but one big takeaway for me is that it is not a matter of whether students are talented or have potential. That is a given. It is a matter of whether they have access to the resources that can allow them the foundation in order to maximize their potential and live out what they are possible and capable of doing. And so to that end, when we talk about financial stability, there are different levels of this work. There are traditional types of financial aid that are critical. Grants, scholarships, loans as we know it. And I will admit that we're talking about minimizing borrowing and minimizing debt and expanding the types of resources that allow students to make progress. So there's the traditional forms of financial aid, and then we talk about basic needs. This is including community services, community resources, public benefits, the kinds of supports that can address what Maslow would include in the lowest, like 2 stages of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And one other thing I want to mention that goes back to the HOPE study around the 52% of students that didn't access supports because they didn't know how. Dr. Pam Rutledge did a study called Maslow Rewired, in which this graphic on the right-hand side was central. And what she did was put connection at the center of all of those different needs and said, in order for any human to be able to access these levels towards self-actualization, it actually begins with some level of connection, whether it's connection with a person, connection with a place on campus, connection with a one-stop shop online, connection with a faculty member, whatever it may be. But it's really about ensuring that there is a way, there is a bridge between the student who has a particular need and the resource that can address that need. And so we're talking about going beyond financial aid. We're talking about even going beyond basic needs to even thinking about what would it mean that in our guided pathways work, if we are helping students have a structured exploration of a meta major or figuring out which program of study is the right program of study, what would it look like if we help students identify the total cost of attendance for that program? That would be beyond tuition and fees, but would include things like books and supplies and certification exam fees and the reality of what that program would require a student to fund. And how could we expand the definition of financial supports to maximize the kinds of aid that doesn't need to be paid back in order to help students address those costs of attendance. So I'm going to pause here. Feel free to use this time to add in the chat as well, but I'd love to go ahead and pass it over to Dilsey to talk a little bit about what some of these ingredients look like in practice, and maybe talking about, especially in the pandemic, what has happened over the last year and what you've been building over the years to be able to address some of these types of student needs. Dilsey?
Thank you so much, Priya. I am excited to be here today, and this is a topic that I am extremely excited about. And so you might find that I talk really quickly because I want to cover a lot in a short amount of time. I invite you and encourage you that if you have questions to certainly ask them. And if you want to do any follow-up, happy to support if you have additional questions. So before I go into the details of what we've done at Cerritos College, I want to just share a quote with you that resonated with me throughout my doctoral journey. And it says, "Everything changes, everything is connected, pay attention." And as we begin to talk about basic needs and what's happening, and I think Priya did a wonderful job of setting the stage, is that for our students, oftentimes as an organization, we approach them in the silos and the divisions by which we're organized as a college. And what I want to just encourage us to do is to think beyond our organizational structures and to think about what we have done in the past. Many of you probably on your college campuses realize that we will never be the same. That really the demands that we are all looking at to support our students really are pushing us to think about things in new ways. And so I will say to you that the way in which I approach this work is to create spaces for us to reimagine and to think about things in a different way. And I will tell you that what you're about to see that we're doing at Cerritos College actually is kind of built from a Cougar Care program that I set up at Cal State San Marcos. And we created that system. And when I created that system with that team, we made mistakes. We created an unsustainable model, but that model is still thriving today because what we were able to do is to readjust, rethink, and do things differently. At MiraCosta, I took the lessons from Cal State San Marcos and adjusted them when we created the MiraCosta Cares work. And so I learned from those mistakes and adjusted, and they have a thriving program and they're doing amazing. And so I will tell you what you're seeing at Cerritos College is because, you know, we've tried some things, they've worked, we adjust, and we keep working. And so I just want to encourage you that perfection's not the goal. That we really have some wonderful opportunities to reimagine what the student experience should be like. And so that's the way in which we approach the work at Cerritos College. So next slide, please. So just a little bit so that you know of our student demographics at Cerritos. 70% of our students receive the California College Promise Grant. 50% receive Pell Grant. And about 7,000 of our students have an expected EFC of 0. So we know that our students are in need of support. And the goal though, and I think as Priya stated, is to, one, are they aware of the support that we offer? And how early can we get it to them so that we are helping them to really eliminate the barrier of financial insecurity? So LACCD in 2017 conducted a food and housing insecurity of community college students in LA. And about 62% are food insecure, 55 are housing insecure, and about 19 are homeless. So really, if you think about what that means though, and I'll show you a slide later about how it relates to the classroom. So next slide, please. So many of you have seen this slide, and it really does resonate with me because I think that oftentimes we think that our resources are aligned in a way that students can understand them or access them. And really, as you know in this slide, students are all over our organizations just trying to figure them out. And really what the goal is and what we're trying to do is to make sure that everything is connected for the student and that we're approaching or have a holistic student support experience for them. And we take that very seriously. And so I hope that as you see what we've put together at Cerritos College, that we are doing it with these values in mind. Next slide. As I just mentioned, actually, when we talk about the food insecurity, housing insecurity, and homelessness, when you look at the numbers that I stated from LA County, what we know then, and we use these numbers with faculty, and I think it's very helpful because oftentimes we think that food and housing insecurity is an isolated situation, right? That, and especially students feel that way, that they're the only ones that are going through that experience. And what we know, when you look at the stats that I shared with you, is that over half of the class, if not more, are actually facing food and housing insecurity. And so how can we, as we've talked about, eliminate that barrier so that students have the ability to show their potential and do the work? Because if we eliminate that, they will excel and do well. And then as we know, 6 out of 30 in a classroom could be homeless or experiencing homelessness. So thank you for that. Next slide. So when I arrived at Cerritos College in January of 2019, one of the things that we had was a basic needs task force. And many of you probably have a task force on your campus that are really, I think, well-meaning people who are passionate about getting resources together, and they are working sometimes within their job scope, but oftentimes just from pure passion to help our students get access to resources. And what we knew at Cerritos College is that if we are committed to removing this as a barrier, then we had to get serious about one, understanding what we needed to do and be intentional about it. And we needed to institutionalize it so that it wasn't just on the backs of well-meaning people. That what we wanted to do is that no matter what employee was here or who could and couldn't do it, that our students it was embedded in our culture and they received that support. So in, I believe it was like February or March when we got there, our board of trustees has always remained committed and had a vision of obviously addressing financial insecurity and helping students who are experiencing homelessness. And so we went to do a presentation with them because we knew that we needed additional resources and support. And we wanted to ensure that we were all on the same page about what we were doing. And so this chart that you're seeing, we extracted them from the league's recommendations that really essentially said you need a basic needs single point of contact, a centralized hub, a seamless system, that you needed to have a committee of campus experts to connect and break down those silos, that you needed a resolution, that you needed to build housing on campus, and then there is that you need to provide overnight safe parking options for students. And so what you're seeing in this chart is the first, our first effort to say, we need your support. And so in that meeting, our board passed a resolution that has really helped to guide the work that we're doing. And as you know, really and quite honestly, that it is hard to get things done if there is not that vision and support from the top. Next slide, please. So once we knew those items were the goal, we created what is called the Falcons Nest. And the Falcons Nest, as you see in the mission, is our centralized support services for students who are facing basic needs insecurities. Now, our goal and our vision and what we are very clear about, and this could be controversial, but what we're very clear about is that it is not our job, nor are we the experts, or do we have the capacity to meet every student's basic needs, their basic needs. We just can't. Our goal and our primary mission is to help students achieve their educational goals. That's our primary mission. That is what we are good at. That's what we need to remain focused on. Now, our role, though, is to make sure that we are, one, helping them get access to services, but that we also are building on and off relationships with different campus agencies on and off campus so that we can triage, we can help mitigate immediate needs, but what we want to do is get them connected to long-term resources. So in our Falcons Nest efforts, we are very, very clear about that. So what I'm really excited about is the Falcons Nest is not just a program and a service. The Falcons Nest is essentially a physical space that really, and I'll show you pictures of what it's going to look like, but it's in our student center. It is about 1,500, 1,700 square feet. We have Francos Market, which is our Trader Joe's experience for students. We believe that we want to provide food with dignity and respect for our students. And so we really created an experience where they're going to a market and they are shopping as if you and I were shopping at Trader Joe's. Fresh produce was very, very important to us. And I was just in there yesterday and I was like, where did the shrimp and all this stuff come from? But it was left over from the food distribution. And so they had brought anything that was left over into the market. And that's what they had given out for that day, tons of milk and, you know, produce. And so that's what was really important to us, is that we wanted students to receive services with dignity and respect. The other thing that is in the Falcons Nest, and that's fine, Priya, you can go back, is the Francos Closet. And so that's professional clothing attire for students. And so many of you know, students, if they are about to go interview, may not have money to go buy a tie or to go buy an outfit to go and interview. And so we wanted to create a closet where we would mitigate some of those challenges for them. What I'm excited about is that it is a space that has, it's set up like a store. It has a changing room so that they can try the clothes on and not take them if they don't fit. And then there's also a children's area there for them. We also have a case manager. And this is something that on all three of the campuses that I've been on that we have always done. And I would encourage you, if you don't have one, that this is really the most important piece to a centralized service and support. Our case manager is a licensed clinical social worker and has a lot of connections in the local community, which is critically important. She also serves on our behavioral intervention team and co-chairs that, which we think is wonderful. And she's our point of contact for our partnership and relationship with Hoveness, which I'll share a little bit more about as well. We have CalFresh there and CalFresh ambassadors, and then we also have legal services for our undocumented students. And so we have a community office there so that they don't have to hunt for space. Next slide. So this you may have heard about, but in June of 2021, we just opened up the 2020, sorry, it's not even June 2021 yet, but in 2020, we opened the village. So part of what we've talked about is the importance of offering housing. And I will say it's because of a commitment of our board and our president that we had the opportunity from a local developer to purchase from district funds a housing area. I don't know why, property. And so we purchased, it is 7 townhomes. It will house between 24 and 28 students. They can stay there for as long as they need to, as long as they are positively progressing forward. And we do this in partnership with Hoveness Incorporated. For us, it was important that we did not get into the housing business because we are not experts in housing, but we wanted to partner with an agency that was the experts in this. And I could tell you so much about this partnership. I truly value our Hoveness partners. They are amazing. This is going very, very well. We also received from the Chancellor's Office the HIP AB 74 funds. And so we also got $2.1 million. Now we decided not to use that 2.1 million on the village because we had already paid for that, had worked on the agreement. We knew that our students who were over 24 were struggling with housing. And we knew that our students that had dependents and family members were struggling with housing. So we applied all of that $2.1 million to with Hoveness, so we're still in partnership with them and they handle all of that for us. We are enter into master lease agreements to support the students. And then because it was important to me that we not just focus on our students who are already experiencing homelessness, but we wanted to focus on our students who we wanted to prevent them. We put $100,000 per year for housing prevention to help a student who needed help with housing so that they didn't lose their home for up to 6 months. And then we provide financial literacy workshops for them as well. Next slide, please. So when we look back, and I'll show you a little bit later, I looked at this chart and started going through to update it for this presentation. And I was like, we have actually completed everything that we started, that we set 2 years ago that we wanted to complete. We have completed that. Now, I will tell you, there's still a lot of work to be done. That what we have done is built a really amazing infrastructure that we continue to build on. But I just want to let you know that I'll show you the timeline, that I think that what we have to understand is that this isn't going to be a quick effort. That if we're truly going to build it into, integrate into the culture of our campus, we really have to know that we have a long-term commitment to certainly our community and to our students. Next slide. So here is the timeline of where it started for us. And I think that I remind you of the photo that I shared where it's more holistic support. And so I really, as I look at this, want you to know that it started when we hired a full-time campus psychologist on the campus, right? And we established our basic needs task force. So this was in 2017. Many of us received the Hunger Free funds. We did a lot, obviously, with Whole Child, but we also began to partner with the LA Food Bank to begin offering on-site food distributions. And I will tell you that since the pandemic started, we have served almost 40,000 people in the community just by doing our food bank once a month. We've also partnered with Hoveness, and we had a peer navigator program, but that's what allowed us to build on that relationship. And Hoveness is an extension of Cerritos College. I meet with the Hoveness team. I did for about 3 months. I met with them weekly to set the criteria, to set the policies for what we were going to do. But I tell you, that relationship is so invaluable to us. Next slide, you'll see some other things that I'll just highlight. You'll see here that we purchased the property in spring 2019. And then we received the HIP funds, and we opened the village of June 2020 and built the Falcons Nest. So our case manager just started in July 2020, and her name is Pamela Sepulveda. And I have to tell you, she is amazing. She is the glue that is holding all of this together. And I'm really excited. I come with some pretty random ideas to her. And so I'll share on this next slide where we're headed because I'm excited about this next phase. So what you're seeing in this picture is we're in the process of building the Student Services Center. And we decided that we wanted our Falcons Nest to be on the front door. Now that's sometimes people think, oh, well, students are going to be embarrassed. But there are many models that show that if you really want students to know that the resources are there, that you put it in a prominent space. And actually students really have received this well, of having that space in a prominent area, because we treat it like a center. We treat it as a community and not as you're just receiving services and support. So the next phase of what we're working on, and this is the part I'm really excited, connected to Guided Pathways. Our general counseling team is moving into a case management model by learning and career pathways, otherwise known as meta majors. We will have 8 of them. So what I asked Pamela to do, and she is doing this and doing it well, is that I realized from my experience in the past few campuses that we have 20,000 students. One case manager is not enough. So what we are doing is hiring MSW interns to serve on the student success teams for every single LCP. And they will all report to Pamela, and they will all do that and address it, obviously, and support our early alert system. So that's the next phase. And I haven't seen that model yet. So I'm really, really excited to see how we're able to best support students. So I think that's it for kind of Cerritos College. I went through it really quickly, but happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Dilsey. There was just a little bit of chat or chatter in the chat box. And what, before I continue on kind of sharing 4 strategies that your college and your college teams can consider in ways to really leverage what you're already doing and build on it, I just want to make a couple of important kind of notes. Much of what Dilsey has shared about the Cerritos story is really about taking stock of already what is happening and finding ways to amplify and elevate that, to connect supports. And as was mentioned in the chat, really thinking about engaging community partners in a deeper way that brings the supports closer to the students, that reimagines what a community partnership can look like. And Dilsey, I'm sure you would mention that like this work takes time, but it is the kind of investment level work that will have a variety of benefits. And much of what you're sharing that is beneficial to students is also beneficial to faculty and staff that are trying to figure out how to support the students when they have students that address, that identify certain types of needs. If there are any questions for Dilsey, feel free to add that in the chat. And I would also wonder if you wouldn't indulge Dilsey and I in maybe just taking a minute and reflecting on the work that your college is doing, and maybe offer in the chat one example of a way that your college has addressed basic needs related to your students in the last year, maybe something that is particularly acute because of the pandemic or because there is a priority that you're already seeing in your students. But we would love to see some of the work that's happening represented by the folks that are in this virtual space with us today.
Did you want me to say it or put it in the chat?
Oh, you can say it.
Oh, I was like, I was going to put it in the chat. I mean, I think that it has been for us to be flexible. Gathering the student voice is, we say it a lot, but it's harder than we think, right? And so what we did originally off the, at the very beginning of COVID, as we saw our withdrawal rates, right? We sent out a survey to all of the students who withdrew and said, can you tell us why you withdrew? What happened? What do you need, right? And that was telling, because I think that we knew that students needed access, as you all know, to technology, and we needed to bridge the gap. But we also knew that we needed to offer food on a more regular basis. We created a very structured system for our emergency aid process and pulled a team together fairly early and mobilized our foundation as well. And so I don't know if folks have Maxient, but we use Maxient for student conduct and for Title IX. But on the previous campuses, I've also used Maxient for early alert. And so we created our emergency aid application process in Maxient, so students could refer and we would have a way to track and support the students. And that actually was very easy to do, to create. It took us an hour to create that, but it has really had long-term effects because we could see patterns and trends and start to know how much students were accessing the support that we have. So Falcons Nest is also in Maxient as well. So this is just a general. We conducted a quick study of all the students who received emergency aid and the CARES funds. And fortunately and unfortunately, I would say that the money we gave them, there were 2 things that stood out in the study. Our students who were less than half time, it didn't make a significant difference for them. And part of that might be because we weren't probably giving as much money as we could. So our next goal with CARES funds is actually to increase the amounts for students, probably not for our full-time students, to about $3,000, so that we can try and entice them to not work on as much, right? So we're trying different things and different models based on the feedback that we're getting from students.
Thank you so much, Dilsey, and some great sharing happening in the chat. I'm actually going to save this chat to look at a little bit of the work that each of your colleges are doing. But part of what we also want to share in this is that no college is starting from scratch. Every college has existing services that might be in pockets that might more naturally support certain groups of students. And what we are advocating for is that it isn't so tied to luck. That when you ask students when they get supports, they'll say, I spoke to a faculty member who was there when I needed them, or I was able to bump into X. And so part of what we're talking about is how can services be structured? How can luck be structured so that a student doesn't have to be in the right place at the right time with the right person to get the support that they need? And so I just want to briefly share 4 strategies that we have developed over the last few years. We've been now looking at this work for the last 8 years, and what we have noticed as themes of colleges that have been doing this work, and 4 critical strategies of this work. The first one being something that Dilsey spent a lot of time talking about, which is better understanding the priority needs of your student population, knowing that it varies by college, it varies by service area. And so understanding what your students need so that you can identify what you're already doing or which partners, what efforts might be worth prioritizing. The second strategy, again, in the spirit of working off of what you already have, is thinking about how to organize and connect the supports so that instead of a student accessing one support at a time, are there ways that when they ask for one service, there's a way for them to be connected to other services that might also be valuable for them? Or also that if they're asking for a particular support like access to food through the food pantry, is there a way to go from what that would be, which is a low intensity support, to high intensity support, which would be helping them access CalFresh funds, for example? The third strategy is, again, in the spirit of not doing new and more, but really how do you leverage existing relationships you have with community partners, faith-based organizations, employers, government agencies, in a way that goes from what we traditionally have, which are like off-campus referrals, where we cross our fingers and hope that a student gets what they need. And if they didn't come back, that we hope that they got it. So how can we make it more intentional that the services are brought closer to students? And the last one is really about ensuring students access support. So many of our colleges have incredible services and workshops that are used or experienced by a small number of students. And so how can we think about normalizing, destigmatizing, and facilitating student access to these supports as well? So I'm just going to kind of walk through these briefly. A couple, and this slide deck, this recording will be available for you to use as well. And we have some resources that are going to be coming out in the next couple of months that really build on these as you and your college teams might be wanting to think a little bit more. A couple of things about the first strategy on understanding student need. The first thing is that we have found that colleges really value this notion of unmet financial need. Unmet financial need is basically the difference between the cost of attendance and the types of financial supports a student gets. And so what else is left over? And Georgia State University, which I would argue is the beacon of institutional reform stories in the country, where they have literally eliminated the achievement gap by both race and also by Pell and non-Pell status students, would say that unmet financial need was actually the highest predictor of success for their students. And I think I noticed this in the chat as well. The other thing is really about how, when we're thinking about building educational plans that are customized and comprehensive for students, where there can also be a complementary, comprehensive financial plan for students as well, that they know how they're going to be paying for their selected program of study term after term as well. A couple of pieces to pull out from the second one, again, really about, like Dilsey was talking about, this like single point, this Falcons Nest, which is the easiest way to direct students to supports. And you may find that you want to do some combination of a centralized or decentralized model. As you're thinking about meta majors, and student success teams are becoming more and more popular, thinking about how you embed folks who can help students by meta major or by clusters of programs will also become increasingly important for students. And also for faculty and staff who may not know, especially because we have, many part-time faculty members, or we have staff members that are not as connected to a lot of the work that is going on, how to be able to help them direct students as well. For partner supports, again, really about deepening the engagement. So much of this is about Who are your partners already? Where do you have existing partnerships? And as Dilsey was mentioning, how can you meet with them in an intentional way? I mean, we've had colleges that have actually positioned the college as a hub for regular regional community partnership meetings. That there were opportunities for the college to connect students to supports, but that there are ways for the community partners and the college to think more creatively about how to leverage multiple funding streams to be able to do something that benefits the entire community. And then lastly, really around ensuring students access supports, it's about trying to figure out where does it make sense to have certain things be opt-in and where does it make sense for certain things to be opt-out. LaGuardia Community College in New York City, they, for every single student that applies, completes the FAFSA as part of the application. And also completes a benefits screening form, like an intake form that identifies things like, are you working part-time, full-time, what are your hours? Are you caring for somebody else, whether it's a child or a family member, etc. And this helps them identify what other supports that student might be eligible for, so that when the student meets with someone from financial aid, they've already earmarked possible supports that go beyond traditional forms of financial aid. And this is all normalized as the LaGuardia experience. Every single student goes through this, so you don't have to raise your hand and ask for help. And as we know in many different areas, the students who most need supports are oftentimes the least likely to ask for them. And so how can we normalize some of these supports so that the raising your hand is not, I need it, but it's, I don't need it, which allows more students to be able to access certain types of services. And then the last bullet point I also want to spend just a couple of minutes on, it's really about, Dilsey was talking about building a culture of respect and a culture of dignity when it comes to basic needs work. This is seen in our food pantries that are well-intentioned, but still can offer less nutritious food options. Or I'm Indian, and I really resonated with a college that had a spice collection or fresh produce, or had their foster youth students creatively build a cookbook that was also worked in partnership with the food pantry. And so thinking broadly about like the dignity of our students comes to this last bullet point of how do we have systems in place right now that is my child knocking on the door. How do we have systems in place right now that unintentionally require students to tell their story over and over and over again, or repeat their trauma over and over and over again? And so where are there opportunities for us to streamline our internal functions so that we don't have to ask them to perform their poverty in ways that are not necessary? There is, as Dilsey mentioned, there's so much we already know about what our students need. And I would even argue that in many cases, our employees are not that far off. There was a study done by UC Davis that found that 1 in 4 adjunct faculty members received at least one public benefit. We've heard stories of colleges where the food pantry is not just used by students, but is also used by employees. And so thinking about how do we create a culture of dignity and a culture of resilience, ensuring that students have what they need in order to access the support so that they can focus on their education. And so lastly, and this is another resource that we're going to be bringing out in the next month or two, we have been developing this notion of outcome statements related to student financial stability. So, we can say that we have so many supports, but really what Dilsey and I are wanting to make sure we focus on is, do students receive them? Which students should receive them that don't receive them? And how can we be more intentional about that equitable form of support? And so here are just some examples. What would it look like from the institution's end to ensure that every student got a clear idea of what the full cost of program would be, how long it would take them to complete their program, whether they were going full-time or part-time, and what they could expect to do as a result of it? What would it look like if we ensured that students had some way of identifying possible supports that went beyond traditional forms of financial aid in the onboarding process? What would it look like if there was a financial plan that was done in tandem with the educational and career plan for students? What would it look like if there was a success network for students, or at minimum, there was one person the student could go to on their campus that was their trusted person. That person doesn't have to have all the answers, but that person would know how to facilitate the student accessing those supports. So these are just some kind of examples of putting it back in the student experience to ensure that even though we have well-meaning supports, that we make sure that we know if and how well they're reaching the students they're made to reach. So I'd love at this point to kind of open it up. If anybody has any questions, we have about 15 minutes. We'd love to kind of have you have some small group discussions for a few minutes before we all come back. But are there any questions that you have for Dilsey or for me in any of the work that we're talking about? You're welcome to add it in the chat. You're welcome to unmute yourself. You're welcome to turn your video on and ask whatever you're comfortable with. And I'll just put the resources on. How involved, from Karen at Victor Valley, how involved are students in the planning and staffing? Karen, is that a question that you have for Dilsey around the work that she described, or are you asking more generally about what's possible?
Well, I'm just thinking specifically about like the Falcons Nest, and as you all are planning, you know, I just heard so many different aspects of what you all were doing. I loved the idea that the mental health interns are being involved with the village. But I just, again, wanted to know, like, how much were students involved in all of this planning? And then do they work? Do they get work study jobs, for example, working at the Falcons Nest? And just the extent to which students are involved in the processes, I guess specifically at Cerritos, but across the board.
No, I think that that's a great question. So like many of your colleges on our task force and any of like the development of programs, we seek the support of our students through our associated students, but also I think going out to student clubs and orgs to talk about what we're planning to do. So I would say to you, like, even in the development of the programs, we are constantly seeking student support. What I will tell you that I think is important for us to consider, and it's an equity issue. And I made an announcement yesterday that I'm about to tackle this because I find it fascinating, and not just with the Falcons Nest, but when we are seeking students to get involved in our committees, we really are asking them to do it for free. Think about a hiring committee, think about our guided pathways committees, think about the committees where we're saying, hey, student, come, we want you to come and put a lot of time and energy in this, and on top of everything else we're doing, but you're gonna do it for free, but we're all gonna get paid. And so this has been something that has bugged me for a very long time, that I'm gonna actually create a program either with them getting gift cards in the bookstore or something to acknowledge the work that they're doing on these committees. So I'll keep you posted on it, but this is something where we need to stop asking students to do things for free. So I will tell you in that notion for the Falcons Nest, one of the things that they're doing at the food distribution, it's heavily relied on by volunteers, right, at the food distribution, and not just students, but the community. And what I love about what they have created there is that students who are receiving services are also feeling that opportunity, and they are seeking us out for this to give back, because they don't want to just receive, they want to be part of that community. And so the Falcons Nest is creating, like I said before, an identified center and place where it's not just come and get food, it's I can come and connect with others and be a part of this community that's addressing needs. So our CalFresh ambassador, if you saw the Chancellor's office call a few weeks ago, she had just an incredible story, but it was because she had gone through crisis and situation and had started turning that around. And so she has even started a Funds for Falcons student org, where she's gonna go out and identify all the different funding opportunities and get that out to students. It is, I see you, Leslie, that is exactly right. And I was like, I'm going to that meeting, right? Because I'm sure there's something I can do to help her as she's getting that. So I guess my answer to your question is yes, students are involved. They will serve as our hourly staff, also with paid positions and helping in Francos Market and in the Falcons Nest. And I identified those funds. The other thing I'm gonna tell you, and Pamela, the case manager, was like, Delcy, really? I was like, we're paying those interns, and we're not just gonna pay them cheap, we're gonna pay them right. because we want the best of the best, and we need to stop thinking even MSW interns don't deserve to get paid. So she was like, oh my gosh, she said people were so shocked as she went through that interview process. So I think for me, my message about that is that we also have to think that as we're giving these services, we need to do it in equitable ways, and not, you know, we want people to be a part of the efforts, and we may not be able to pay you tons of money, but we can acknowledge your work and efforts in some way. So yes, whenever we will take volunteers, and people will do that, but we will also pay people. So yes.
And Dilsey, would you want to take the next question as well from Alex about assisting undocumented students who may have difficulty finding jobs or unable to?
Yeah, so I think this is a great topic and a long-term opportunity. In this topic, so many of you know when CARES funds first came out, we weren't allowed to do it. We couldn't use it for our undocumented students. And I have great advocates on our campus, and I didn't feel right and felt unsettled. And so we made that commitment and matched exactly what we did for the students with CARES funds for our undocumented dreamers. We matched it and paid them out of equity. So I think I must have put like $400,000 out of equity towards mirroring exactly what we did in CARES. Now, you know, that has shifted, right, with CARES funds. And so we're able to do that, and we receive that information. And so the piece around the internships is I'm actually trying to work with our Career Center to increase internships and apprenticeships for all. That I think when we think about equity-minded challenges, right, that one, we know that they don't have paid internships and apprenticeships like many students, and that is not okay. And so yes, we need to work on undocumented students. I have to tell you a story. I went to our Safe Zones training for our IndocuAllied program, and the students on the panel, you know, they get you every time because they're just so, like, they are resilient. They are great stories. And a student told us a story about an undocumented student could not do an internship because she didn't have a social right. And that just frustrated me so much that I went on a hunt to find money in the foundation and through it. But I have to tell you, it was a frustrating experience. I even as a vice president, it was hard to get that money to her, that I ended up using my own money through the foundation because I couldn't figure out. And so I would say to you, this is an area we want to continue to work on, and we have to build partnerships with to make sure that we're not hindering our undocumented students. And I would also say what we did realize, our international students are hurting. People think that our international students are rolling in money because they're here, and that's not true either. And so I've had the team meet with the foundation to figure out how to get access to some of our international students as well. So I would say we're still working on that, but I think we all should be tackling how to better support our undocumented students and students in general with paid internships and apprenticeships.
Thank you so much, Dilsey. Katie, your question asks about adopting opt-out approaches and what some of the sources for that information may be. In the spirit of working with what you have, I would identify if you have any existing surveys that you've conducted, if your college has participated in the Real College, and that's like a very direct way. But even there are proxies for it. So you could look at which students have completed the FAFSA, even though we know that is that's undercounting the severity. But in the FAFSA, there are questions around whether or not a student receives SNAP, which is a supplemental nutrition, what their housing situation is, what their parents' food and housing situation is. So that's also a space where you can learn about that. And then the other idea is also about, like, in your application process, there are some optional questions that you can add in. And if that's another place where in the natural onboarding, there might be a space where you can get some of that information. If you participate in any kind of surveys like CESI, again, they have additional questions. So the idea about where you can look, I would advocate for seeing what you're already collecting and seeing if what you're already collecting may point to a little bit of clarity around what the major needs are. And the other piece I will always recommend is disaggregation is probably the first step. So whenever you're looking at at how severe a certain issue is, how are you disaggregating it by race or by gender or by other types of metrics that are important to your institution to better understand which groups, like Dilsey was saying, you might find that certain groups are facing more severe versions of certain types of needs. And Leslie, to your point around nonprofits, faith-based, absolutely. I think this is a matter of getting very creative about who your community partners are. And I would also add in there foundations and private donors that are literally looking for ways to spend their money. And there is a lot of mutual benefit in being able to connect on these kinds of broader, humanizing focused efforts. I would also add businesses and employers, and also mutual aid groups, which have really bubbled up in the last year as well.
Priya, can I just add, you know, oftentimes this can feel overwhelming because even as I'm listening, I'm like, I got to work on this and I got to do this and I got to do that. And I think that what we have to remind ourselves is that perfection is not the goal, which I've said, but also that, you know, and I've said this and I believe this, we may not meet every need. We may not, but we sure can try. And so I think that it's just a constant evolution and just encouraging us to be in that constant state of reflection and give ourselves permission to reimagine on a regular basis. And I think that in academia, we often get so rigid and so stuck. And part of that is because we have, you know, the urgency of the day just consumes us. But I think that when we create these intentional spaces, as I put inside of the chat, we really can bring the collective wisdom of the wonderful teams that we have around us to create some amazing things. And I will tell you that even in the work that they're doing now, they're doing things that I wouldn't have even thought about, that I'm like, wow, whoa, right? That I think what our job is as leaders is to create that space and give people permission to rethink how we do things and from the lens of a student.
Truly. I think we'll go ahead and skip the small group breakouts because that would literally be for 90 seconds. Are there any other questions in our last couple of minutes together? Thank you for adding more suggestions in the chat of places that are regional that you can look into doing. And the other part, because you are neighboring colleges, if there are ways to even strengthen your kind of regional approach together about finding ways that you can support each other in the kind of partnerships that you have in the community as well. Thanks for adding that question, Dilsey. If you wouldn't mind indulging us, maybe you can talk a little bit, you can share in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just share what is something that you might take away from the session, or what's something that is one action step you might consider doing with your colleagues.
I heard a saying that resonated with me is that when you learn new information, if you don't do anything with it within 48 hours, you'll never do it. You won't go back to it. You'll have learned it and moved on. And so I love these types of questions where we think about one thing within our sphere of control that we can do, right? Because leadership in an organization is at all levels, right? And so we all have something in our sphere of control. And so I encourage you, even if you don't do it, you know, right here and today, to think about one thing you want to take away from this and do on your campus or, you know, in your community.
Thank you for sharing, Jake. I'm looking through this great resource. Needs assessment during outreach. Absolutely, Karen. That's really telling. And then if we dream a little bit big, what would ongoing needs assessment look like? Because for third, fourth, fifth semester students, we hope that they remember what they learned in orientation when we ourselves may not. So how can we make sure that we also do a lot of just-in-time support? If we had more time, I would tell you about a student services syllabus, which many colleges have been experimenting with, that brings term-specific information to students regardless of where they are in their journey. Oh my gosh, these are great. Thank you so much. Tanisha, hashtag not striving for perfection. Best thing I've heard that I am living by is imperfect action is way better than perfect inaction. And Karen, if you need any help with the student services syllabus, feel free to email me and I'm happy to share a couple of resources or examples from colleges. I'm putting my chat. Oh, many are asking. Yes, absolutely. if you wouldn't mind just putting your email in the chat, I can also make sure that we can get to you. I know we're at time. And McKenna, I know you're out there. I don't know how long we have in this room, but feel free to add your email and we can send out the slide deck and we can send out some resources as well.
I think there's like 1 or 2 minutes that you have without it like closing.
Oh,
A couple minutes, I think.
great. I'm going to go ahead and save the chat in.
Priya, this is Leslie Belmonte. I'm the Guided Pathways Regional Coordinator. If you can send it to me, I will send it to all our networks as well as all the attendees. So that would be awesome.
Oh, where have you been? All of our sessions live. I'm so glad you're here. That's great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. It was really nice to spend a little bit of time with you, and good luck in your work. Thanks, Dilsey.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Priya.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Have a great weekend.
See you in May. The year